Hey everyone, welcome back to the Pilot's Wife podcast. This is episode 8, and for the next couple of podcasts, I'm going to do a bit of a series on unfaithfulness. The topic has come up a little bit lately in a couple of different contexts. I've been doing a bit of thinking about it, and couples often feel nervous about this topic when it comes to getting married, and so I wanted to broach it and talk about it, not even just from a perspective of before you get married, but even once you are married. And we all have arguments or discussions where we haven't resolved something yet, and in the meantime we feel awful and we feel distant, and we think, gosh, I hope that they don't go and try and find someone else because we're having a bad time. It's really a logical thought, and it's illogical because, as I'll talk about it during the podcast, people don't go out waking up one day and looking for somebody to have an affair with. It's not as conscious as that. But so be encouraged. It's not like that's what happens when someone feels distant. They go looking for someone. But we do have that concern and that subconscious kind of worry that something like that might happen to us. And so I just wanted to talk about that and talk about what you can do to avoid that happening as much as possible. So here's the question. For those of us who don't have a picture-perfect relationship, who don't put our highlights reel on social media and pretend it's all rosy, where can I get some down-to-earth inspiration without any religious barriers? Who can give me real-life encouragement, help me be a better spouse, and tell me how to get an even more enriching relationship without becoming a doormat? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. I'm Amy McLaren, and this is the Pilot's Wife podcast. So, unfaithfulness. I've got a lot to say about this, but this is really, really hard for me to talk about on a podcast as well, because it's. I like to give a lot of examples when I'm talking about some of this stuff, but this one is a really, really tough one to give examples for when I really do not feel comfortable talking about examples in the relationship between Josh and I. And, I'll talk about this in much, much more detail later on, but there's something called the marriage zone, and it's certain things that are just between me and Josh that are nobody else's business. And when I'm talking about unfaithfulness and ways to avoid it and things like that, it is hard for me to talk about. I feel really nervous that I don't want to go over the line when I'm talking about it, because I know, so Josh, he's awesome and he listens to my podcast and he'll give me feedback, and I really don't want to disrespect him in any way. So this is really hard for me to do this podcast, but I really want to talk about it because, it is hard to talk about, and so people don't talk about it, and it needs to be talked about. But please forgive me if sometimes this is a bit stilted and I sometimes have to think about what I'm saying. So just putting that out there to start with. So affairs don't happen intentionally. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, right, today I'm going to look for someone who I can have an affair with. And this is really, really important to know. And this doesn't come from, this is standard knowledge from marriage counsellors. I've not learned this on my own, but from counsellors who've had heaps of experience helping screeds of people who've gone through unfaithfulness in their marriages. But we've helped screeds of people set up strategies for avoiding this kind of thing from happening in their relationship before it even is a consideration or a problem. So it is something that I can talk about from the setting up point of view really, really well, like how to avoid it happening. And so that's what the focus is going to be, not too much on what it's like going through it. And I just want you to be aware that this is definitely my opinion, and I'm sorry if I have, if some of my opinion comes through quite strongly. Just remember to take it with a grain of salt. But I do think there's some value in what I can share with you that can help you to both feel comfortable with it, not feel like a doormat, and also to feel confident that you can not worry about it happening in your relationship. Even if it's maybe a potential thing that would happen in the future, the important thing is to not worry about it and keep it out of your relationship in the sense that it's not going to be an issue. And if you treat it like it's not going to be an issue, it's probably going to help it not become an issue. I'll go more into that later on. So the strategy is to avoid fears happening in your relationship, to avoid unfaithfulness. to make sure it stays out is just to pre-prepare. And it's just about setting up some stuff to keep it out beforehand. So some of you might know from listening that Josh, he's a pilot, but he's currently out of work. And in fact, everybody in New Zealand that worked for the same company as him, all the pilots are out of work at the moment because of this great little COVID virus thing. And so he's feeling a little bit out of place, a little bit out of sorts, and he's like, I need a project. And so, and I've said, I really need some more space to plant some more vegetables. I've been growing all these seedlings and I don't have anywhere to plant them. And so he's been designing me a vegetable garden. And something that got him really excited was he found out this little tip that you can use to keep slugs out, because that's obviously a major consideration, because as soon as you plant little seedlings, the slugs just come and overnight they're all gone. And so he's found this thing that you can do, this trick where you just put like a really thin wire all around the raised bed. If you build it out of wood or something, put it all around the raised bed and then you attach it to a battery, a 9-volt battery or something, and then the slugs they'll just touch the tip of it and then kind of go back. And he just has been watching some videos and having a few laughs watching these slugs get shocked. But why I'm telling you this is kind of what we're thinking when we're talking about setting it up in your relationship so that unfaithfulness doesn't become a thing. It's kind of like you're putting that electric fence around your relationship before anything is even becoming a problem, so you keep it out. And so there's two kind of areas that I'll talk about. One is keeping it out from your perspective, like you keep it out of your relationship, and the other is keeping it out from your partner's perspective, which you have lesser control over. So keeping it out for you. And the first thing that I will say is that the grass is not always greener on the other side. And so if we ever are tempted by somebody else who we just meet and we think, wow, they're amazing, or they look nice, or anything like that, when we meet someone, we see their good qualities before we find out their bad qualities, right? Unless when we meet them, they show their bad qualities straight away, in which case no one's interested in that, of course. But we don't find out someone's negative qualities until later, because people don't put those forward. And so what I would guarantee is that the grass is definitely not always green on the other side, because whilst your partner, you may know their faults now, whoever else you may meet in future will also have their own faults. And there are kind of two aspects of this. There's keeping it out when you are the one that sees someone and has an interest, or also that someone sees you and has an interest. So what are the signs that someone has an interest in you? And I think we all know these, subconsciously, but it's things like they might have longer eye contact with you, or sort of hang around after a conversation is finished and try and think of something else to talk about, or I don't know, it could be anything. And I guess for me, I am very, very aware of things like longer than necessary eye contact, and things like certain grins or smiles or jokes even. And those are the sort of signs. But I'm hoping that as I'm talking about this, you would also know in yourself when you can recognise that someone's got interest in you. Maybe you can think about when you were dating your husband or wife, how you knew they were interested in you. I mean, it's the same kind of thing, right? And so the first thing is to recognise that there are some signs and consciously bring them up to our kind of consciousness and go, okay, there's something happening here, because it's really, really important that we recognise it. We recognise that this is an electric fence moment where we want to put in some protections, or raise the hackles, or start that protection going. And what I mean by protection is those things that you pre-prepared ahead of time to do if the situation ever came up. And so what I'm talking about is your response to this kind of interest going on. There's this listening exercise we do when we do the pre-marriage training, where we have couples take turns being a good listener and a bad listener. And so we say, okay, now one of you talks and the other person pretend to be a good listener, and then when we give the signal, start pretending to be a bad listener. And everybody who does this exercise knows inherently, right, just how to be a bad listener. You don't have to tell them what to do. They can just they can just do what they need to do to be a bad listener. And it's the same with being a bad encourager of someone having an interest in you. So it's where you don't have to be rude to someone, but you can definitely use body language to show that you are not interested in a certain way with somebody or in somebody. And so the body language is key. And so, even just the example of talking about eye contact, we need to start going, okay, this eye contact is starting to be a bit uncomfortable, too much, whatever they're talking about, too much, they're sharing too much, whatever. And you can then start reducing your eye contact, or you can start reducing the amount of time that you talk and getting out of there soon after the conversation's finished, or whatever it is, right? But what I'm saying is you inherently know that stuff, and it doesn't need to be rude if a lot of it is body language, right? You don't have to say some rude things, because I know that can be a thing, especially like if it's someone at work, or even if it's someone sort of more senior than you, and you don't want to rock the boat, you don't want to disadvantage yourself or lose out on a promotion or anything. But on the other hand, you don't have to encourage or allow that kind of behaviour just so that you don't miss out on that sort of stuff, because you can still be direct in the sense of showing that there's no interest there without being rude. And so this is, and when I say that as well, think about how bad it would be if you offended them, and what would be the worst case scenario, and would that worst case scenario be worse than something really awful happening in your relationship where there was something that went out of line. I remember doing a course on self-defense, and they talked about kind of like I don't know the word for it, but it's something like the predator of like someone who really how am I going to say this? So in the self-defense course, we talked about people who get into a situation where, say, like a female will get raped, and they talk about how it happens over time, that the predator will do certain things and kind of gain kind of access into that person's, like that the person, they'll try something really little that they will get the person to let them do, and then they'll try something else, and they'll try something else, and they're just getting this person to let them do stuff to them, like as in, let me buy you a drink, let me sit next to you, like little stuff. But the idea is that it's a little bit rude, but the people don't want to be rude back, so they let them do it. And so it's the same here. Like we don't have to worry about not being rude, if we can see that something like this is going on. So, and again, like this is really serious stuff, and not many people should or would experience this, but I just want to talk about this because what if there is somebody out there that is experiencing this and this helps them? So, I know it's serious, but please don't get put off by that. It might be helpful to someone. And then if it's you that has the interest, for example, someone that just started working with you, they might be really stunning and you just can't stop looking at them because they look really amazing or they look really good. Or they could be really clever and you just want to gain a whole lot of knowledge from them, and so you spend a lot of time talking with them, and then you start sharing about your hobbies, and you start conversations, and it gets into that sort of stuff. If it's you, then I encourage you to think about what is your marriage worth to you to protect, because if it comes down to it and you have to do something that does offend that person, or that means you have to, let's say, move desks, move a job, move away from that person so that it's not a problem, wouldn't that be worth it if it meant the difference between somebody getting in the way of your marriage relationship or not? And so this is not rocket science, but think of the good things and the good times that you have with your spouse when you're around this person, and also look for their negative traits. Try and pull them out sooner rather than later, so that you can just go, okay, not so rosy. Let's take off those rose-coloured glasses with this other person. And again, I know that inherently, as long as you're consciously aware that this might be happening with you, then you inherently know what you can do to disengage that interest and turn it off. But if you can't, then wouldn't it be worth it to get out of that situation? And so that's all that I'll talk about on keeping it out of your relationship when it's you. And then now I'm just going to talk about keeping it out when it's your partner. And the first thing I'll say here is, and I say this all the time, but love is voluntary. And what that means is you don't have a right to it just because you're married. You don't have a right to your partner's love just because you're married. And I think that might be new for some people to hear. I think, if someone promises their ongoing love and commitment for the rest of their lives, on your wedding day, you think, well, that means something, and so you should. But you've got to remember that if someone is feeling disengaged from your relationship, like if your spouse is feeling like that, or they don't feel like that you love them, you can't make them love you. You never have a right to, like, they're never going to be forced to love you just because they said that they would always love you, right? And so it's important to remember that, because I think that helps when it comes to not being a doormat. We can't rely on somebody else's love to make us complete. And the less we rely on it, the more likely that somebody's going to feel the space in the room enough to give us their love, because they're not going to feel like they have to. They feel like they voluntarily can, and they're going to be more willing to do it out of their own will. And so that's really important. So, and what we do in the pre-marriage stuff is we get couples to do, we get them to define a marriage zone. So what a marriage zone is it's basically putting a kind of an invisible line or a circle around your marriage relationship. Everything inside that circle with you two is only for you, and it's no one else's business. And it could be that we're talking about just 2 or 3 things that you both agree on, or have agreed to honour in the other person, that you just don't talk about or do or say or whatever with anyone else. And so examples of that are, not talking about maybe how much money you earn, or not giving a certain facial expression or smile to somebody else. And so I say that, but that's not something that Josh and I agreed on having in our marriage zone. That's just something that I've put in place. So when I'm around males, there's a smile that's only for Josh, and I would never smile that way for anyone else, and things like that. But so whatever's in that marriage zone is just yours, right? And it's not for anyone else. And when you have something like that together, it creates an intimacy level where you know that those things are just for you, and it brings you closer, and it makes you feel closer when you share those things together, and you know they're not shared with anyone else. And then outside that marriage zone are things that it's okay to share, and you both agree that it's okay to share. Like you might both feel comfortable talking to people about your salary and what you each earn, or decisions that you're trying to make in your marriage, and having input on those decisions in particular areas. So that's what a marriage zone is. And so if you do that before you ever have a problem, it's easy, right? Because it's just set in place, and there's no ulterior motive. There's no someone's feeling distrustful and wants us to put a marriage zone together because they don't think the other person's sticking to it or whatever. So if there are already, I guess, issues or shared things that have been shared outside this marriage zone without having set one up, it's probably because you have a different idea of the marriage zone than your partner does. And so what you want to do is get an idea of what their thinking is when it comes to marriage zone. What is okay for them to share? Is there anything that's not okay to share? And having that discussion after the fact. So not that you have to have done it beforehand. That is all is not lost if you haven't done it. But talk to your partner about what would there be, if anything, that they wouldn't be comfortable with you talking to, and give examples like, could I talk to my mum? Would you have a problem if I talked to my mum about X and Y? So that's something you can do, now, today, tonight, and it'll help put in place some boundaries. I was having a work do one night where I was finishing up working for that place, and so we went to a bar for drinks, and I was one of the last, even though I was driving, but I was just enjoying catching up with everyone and saying goodbye. And so I wasn't drinking, but I just hung around. So I was one of the last three people there. And so it was me, and there was this other guy, work colleague, who was married with a couple of kids, and another work friend who was single. She's great girl, really bubbly and really friendly. really beautiful, but also the life of the party, and partying is what she did best, and she loved to party, and she loved to was a very promiscuous person. And then later in the evening, she invited her friend to join us, and her friend was also similar to this. And they got to talking about certain escapades that they'd got up to. It was really, really uncomfortable conversation. But this other work colleague of mine, he was really getting into it and sharing his own stories and blah, blah, blah of his college days and whatever. And then at some point, she said, would you like to come back to my place for a drink? Because, let's get out of here. We've been in this pub for a while. To this guy, my work colleague, and obviously her friend who was her flatmate as well. And they were going to go home. And there was this decision point where, I just looked at him and thought, surely you're not going to go. Because we all knew about her reputation. We knew that she didn't care that he was married and had kids. She would totally come on to him because that's what she does. She's this party girl, right? And he, in that moment, I guess he just felt like he would get something from that he couldn't otherwise get, and he decided to go. And it's actually a really hard story for me to recall because I was right there and I didn't say anything, and if I'd said something, maybe I could have made a difference, because sure enough, about 2 weeks later, his marriage had ended. And it was just a stupid one-night decision that wasn't even important to him, but because he didn't have anything in place, it was just like, well, why not? It's just a drink, it's fine, it's safe. But when I'm talking about marriage zone, I'm talking about things like, if I ever got into a situation where I was going to be in a room with somebody and we were drinking, well, I wouldn't get into that situation, right? And so for me, I would just not go to someone's house when it was just going to be me and someone of the opposite sex, or two people of the opposite sex, or whatever it is. I just wouldn't do it. And again, this is me, my marriage zone. You decide what you want in yours. But this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, just setting some stuff out beforehand so that when you get into a situation, it's like, I've already made the decision about what I would do in the situation, so I'm just going to make that decision. It's easy. I don't have to think about it. The decision's already made. I'm just not going to go there. Another technique, I guess, for keeping it out when it comes to your partner is that we need to show them love in order for them to voluntarily give us love, right? So we can't make them love us, but we can love them and then hope that they'll return it, right? And so I'm not talking about doormat style, I love you, please don't ever cheat on me type of thing. I'm talking about loving them how they want to be loved. They don't want to be loved with condition, like, please, I'll love you, but just don't cheat on me. They want to be loved with no condition. They want to be loved how they like being loved. And if you haven't come across the 5 love languages, or you haven't done that test, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. So what is their love language? And even just in general, like, females, they feel loved when they're adored, when they're treated like a princess, when they're told they're beautiful, when they're told that they're, by their man, that their man can't live without them, that they just they want to be with them forever and they love them. For a male, it's a bit different. They want to be told by their wife that their wife respects them. They want to feel liked. They know that we love them, but they don't always know that we like them. So they want to know that we enjoy their company, that we find their jokes funny, that we think that they are really smart, that they, that they look really hot in their rugby shorts or whatever it is. But we need to show them the love in the way that they recognise it, so they feel loved, so that they're not tempted when it comes to having situations like that. When someone feels in a loving relationship and they feel close to their partner, they're less likely to be tempted to want to even to go anywhere with anyone else and make dumb decisions. And the last thing that I have here is just to decide to, it's really important to decide to trust your partner, like putting on a coat kind of thing. Like, I'm going to put on a coat of trust and I'm going to decide that I'm going to trust them, right? So even if you have doubts and you feel like there's something that maybe you should be worried about, like putting on a coat of trust and saying, no, I'm going to trust that they aren't going to do anything bad to me. And then you can treat them like you trust them, that they're not going to do anything bad to you. And what that does is it forms that reciprocal, kind of a little bit like how I've been talking about with that cognitive dissonance, and that you can't change your partner, but you can change some things that will make them feel willing to change. If you have been a little bit untrusting, or even if you haven't, if you decide to be trusting and say, this is not something that I feel will be a problem for us, then they feel more likely to respond to that and go, yeah, you're right, that trust is well earned. And so whether they do or don't respond to that well, and whether they do or not decide to do something stupid, we are not responsible for that response. We cannot control what they actually do in the end. I think of it like this. So the word responsible, response-able, I'm not able to control someone else's response, so I'm not responsible for their response. And it's the same here. Like, no matter what we do, we could be the best, amazing wife in the world and the most loving, and we could have the most awesome, close bond relationship and the awesomest relationship out there, and it could still happen. And so we need to just not feel responsible that it could happen, not worry about it, just trust that it's not going to happen, and then that will increase the likelihood that it doesn't, but it can never totally guarantee that it won't. And we just have to be comfortable that we are not reliant on someone else for our own happiness. And I can go into that, and I think I will in another podcast, but for now, like thinking about it like putting on a coat. Like, I'm going to decide to trust this person. It's not going to be a problem. Then I don't have to worry about. I don't have to stress about it. So, I really hope that helped. A really heavy topic, and again, not easy to talk about. But hey, look, I'm putting it out there, and maybe it'll help someone. If you are having issues, or you're going through something like this, I encourage you to find someone to talk to about it, and don't just let it lie, and don't try and work it out by yourself and resolve it if you have no idea how to resolve it. If you've got a plan in place, that's great, but don't just let it carry on and be dissatisfied with whatever's going on. Find someone to talk to about it. With that said, I just want to encourage you. I hope that none of you that are listening need this or are going through anything like this, and I really hope that if you know someone who is, then maybe you can share it with them and get them to listen to it. Please follow the podcast if you liked it, or if you want to hear more, because then each time there's a new episode, so every week you'll get a notification and you'll see that. So really appreciate you for listening. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you again next time.